Hi everyone. In this video, we are going to briefly examine the legality of mandating the COVID-19 vaccine in the workplace under Irish law. Before we begin, I want to give you an update as regards the commencement of legal proceedings to challenge the COVID-19 laws through our GoFundMe campaign. To say we have faced many hurdles over the past several months cannot be overemphasised, many of which I must admit I did not expect. These hurdles have included 1. A reluctance by barristers to act for us in challenging the COVID-19 laws, in some cases being told I wasn't the right kind of plaintiff. 2. A reluctance by businesses to join our right to work legal action in circumstances where I had received hundreds of contact from businesses over the preceding 8 months to ask if I would act on their behalf in challenging the COVID-19 laws. To be clear, only 5 businesses have applied to join the right to work legal action to date. And 3. A lack of cooperation by lawyers, doctors, scientists and other groups operating in Ireland to assist with collating information for expert reports needed to establish that the COVID-19 laws are disproportionate and therefore unconstitutional. In many cases, when I've approached such people and groups, they have agreed in the first instance to help, but when it came time to do the work, they have ignored my correspondence or advised they don't have the time or expertise to assist. I was mistakenly under the impression that those of us who are outspoken regarding the COVID-19 laws all had the same end goal. I was wrong. Many of those from whom I have sought help and who many of you ask me on a continual basis to collaborate with appear more interested in views for their videos, being interviewed, giving speeches and increasing their profiles than actually doing any real work in the background for which they will get little to no acknowledgement. I have also been asked by some of these people why I am asking for their assistance for free when I have gathered so much money through the GoFundMe, with many people and groups appearing disgruntled that I have received your support. Every way I have turned, I have been hit with a brick wall. While I acknowledge that I needed to learn this hard lesson, I now accept that I spent too much time over the past 10 months asking and expecting others to help. That said, I must acknowledge that there are a group of people, which also includes my family, who have offered their help and support without condition. For instance, a lady contacted me many months ago and offered to create the ICHR website for free. I did not know this person and she isn't even from Ireland, but she has offered her help and support over many months without wanting any form of recognition. I must also acknowledge those currently on the board of advisors for the ICHR who I know would help in any way I asked. I have also had a lot of sincere offers for help from people who have donated to the GoFundMe, so I want to sincerely thank all of you for that. The difficulty with the offers I have received to date is that they are not from people with the expertise needed to compile expert reports to challenge the proportionality of the laws. For all of the reasons just mentioned, we have had to abandon all legal actions considered to date and consider instead a technical legal challenge which requires no expert reports, meaning I will no longer be relying on help from those who will not assist. The machine that is the government, the media and the HSE, all pushing the same narrative on a daily basis, required a coordinated response from all of us on the side of freedom to stand any chance of success at disproving the narrative. I have accepted a lot of criticism from a lot of people to date, and in many cases I have not responded because I was always focused on the bigger picture of trying to bring everyone together to challenge these unprecedented laws. I am no longer willing to accept criticism for actions over which I have no control and for the failings and shortcomings of others. If we had the assistance we requested and expected from others, we would have been able to commence legal proceedings many months ago. Many of these people, whom I now am very critical of, have been very opinionated about the approach I should take and thereafter my lack of progress. This I find particularly incensing, given that these same people, when asked for help, go silent. But they feel entitled to try and manipulate me into taking a particular course of action. Perhaps you should ask yourself what any of these people have done to actually move forward any form of legal action in this country. Many people will say I am burning bridges by saying these things. I do not accept that, as the bridges you think exist do not. And I am no longer prepared to pretend collaborations are taking place when they are not. I now accept that we are very much alone, and I am proceeding on this basis. Given what I have experienced over the past 10 months, I cannot overemphasize how I fear for the future of this country and our continued loss of freedom. One person, no matter who you are, cannot reverse the catastrophic damage that has been done to the idea of freedom in 2020. To stand any chance at reversing this damage required people to put agendas and egos to one side and move forward with a common goal backed up by the commitment to do what was necessary to achieve that goal. To finish, I confirm that I intend to publish a video to explain the legal avenue we will be pursuing over the next couple of weeks, and also a couple of other initiatives that we intend to commence to challenge other aspects of the COVID-19 legislation, for which we will ask for your continued support. Let's now look at the question which is the purpose of this video. Can employers make it a mandatory health and safety requirement for employees to be vaccinated? As matters stand, and in circumstances where the Irish government do not enact specific COVID-19 vaccination laws, the legislation that employers would be relying on to try and mandate the COVID-19 vaccine in the workplace is the Safety, Health and Welfare at Work Act 2005, which we will call the Act in this video. So the Act obliges employers to carry out a risk assessment to identify health and safety risks to people in their place of work, and thereafter to take steps to remove or minimise any risk identified. What this means from an employer perspective is they might consider it reasonable to ask, not mandate, ask employees to be vaccinated arising from their duty under the Act. Noting also that the Act obliges employees to cooperate with their employer so that the employer can actually comply with its duty to reduce workplace risks. That said, if an employer can show that having carried out a risk assessment, that a vaccine is the most reasonably practicable way of mitigating the risk of COVID-19, it could, in theory, actually make mandatory the COVID-19 vaccine as a health and safety requirement. Where an employer concludes that mandating the COVID-19 vaccine is lawful, it would still be very risky for that employer to conclude that a refusal by employees to accept the vaccine would amount to a health and safety breach warranting either disciplinary action or termination of employment due to the protections every person in the state has under the Irish Constitution, including the right to bodily integrity, privacy and autonomy. There is much case law in Ireland around the meaning of these rights, and the courts have concluded these rights to mean that a competent adult patient must consent to medical treatment and can also refuse medical treatment. That said, we know from the complete erosion of our fundamental human rights during 2020 and 2021 that where the common good dictates, the government believe they may override these individual rights, but this would require the Irish government introducing COVID-19 vaccine-specific legislation, which I personally think is unlikely, as the mandating of vaccines in other countries often reduces the uptake for the vaccine in question. With this in mind, I think it is far more likely that the government, the media and the HSE will use coercive measures to achieve their goals, including what they say will be an information campaign. So, in circumstances where the government do not introduce COVID-19 vaccine-specific legislation, an employer may ask employees as part of its duty to reduce risks in the workplace to accept the COVID-19 vaccine. And in circumstances where an employer wishes to make mandatory the COVID-19 vaccine in the workplace, the only legislation an employer can rely on in this regard is the Safety, Health, Welfare at Work Act 2005. But the main difficulty employers will face in seeking to rely on this act is providing a legitimate justification for the vaccine in circumstances where we are advised that the vaccine will only reduce symptoms of the person who is vaccinated but may not prevent transmission. The argument around the right to bodily integrity holds firm, while the only person the unvaccinated person is potentially damaging is themselves. However, if it transpires that the vaccine reduces or stops transmission, then it would be open to an employer to argue that the most effective way to reduce or minimise the risk of the spread of COVID-19 would be to require employees to be vaccinated. So this is an area to pay particular attention to into the future. Other issues that should be considered also include 1. What sector you work for. For instance, it would be easier to justify mandating the COVID-19 vaccine in the healthcare sector than other sectors, given their contact with the old and ill. 2. Some people may be able to argue a refusal of the COVID-19 or other vaccine on religious grounds under the Employment Equality Acts, which protects employees against discrimination on the grounds of religion. 3. Some people may be able to argue a refusal of the COVID-19 or other vaccines for medical reasons, which might amount to a disability, meaning requiring such employees to take the vaccine could amount to a breach of the Employment Equality Acts due to discrimination on the grounds of disability. And 4. Women who are pregnant, breastfeeding or considering becoming pregnant can argue against taking the COVID-19 vaccine, given that guidance has already been published advising against this group taking the vaccine. What this means is that if an employer concludes that as part of its risk assessment under the Safety, Health, Welfare at Work Act, that in order to reduce the risk of the spread of COVID-19, it will introduce a blanket mandatory vaccination policy in the workplace, this would likely amount to unlawful indirect discrimination unless it can be objectively justified. So employers will need to be very careful to scrutinise the justification for the policy and consider whether there are reasonable alternatives. To conclude, if your employer is pressuring you to take the COVID-19 vaccine, in the first instance, I would suggest that you ask for a copy of the risk assessment they carried out under the Safety, Health, Welfare at Work Act and the legal justifications for the vaccine and any reasonable alternatives they considered. You should be mindful that a refusal to accept the vaccine may result in your employer terminating your employment. That is not to say any such termination would be lawful, but we should be cognizant of the fact that many businesses and employers have been operating outside of the law for the past 10 months and may seek to continue to do this into the future, meaning that you should tread carefully and ensure you seek independent legal advice if you are facing pressure from your employer concerning the vaccine. Thanks for listening.